Summer 1964, Brazil. Latvian Nazi. Herbert Cukurs is quietly residing in São Paulo, the man infamously remembered as the hangman of Riga. It seems like a calm existence, but everything is about to change. Cukurs is photographed in Brazil by a member of the local Jewish community. They recognize him at once, fully aware of who he is. Cukurs participated in some of the most despicable atrocities of the Second World War, working alongside Latvian Nazis in the slaughter of thousands, men, women, children, and the elderly. There is a vast body of testimony preserved in post-war archives that I have personally examined, and in those records, the name Cukurs comes up repeatedly. Those photographs of Cukurs make their way across the globe to a specialized Nazi hunting unit inside Israel's Secret Service. This sparks one of the boldest missions in Mossad's entire history. September 1, 1964. A Mossad operative is summoned to a covert operational apartment in Paris. His commander informs him, "We have a highly unusual mission for you. We want you to go to South America and track down a Nazi named Cukurs. If you are new to buried intel, welcome. This channel is all about digging up the classified, the forgotten, and the suppressed. Subscribe and stay with us as we go even deeper." From this day forward, he is told, his name will be Anton Kunzle. The commander explains that Cukurs is now living in Brazil. Before the war, Cukurs had been an officer in the Latvian Air Force. In mid-1941, when Hitler invaded Latvia, Cukurs aligned himself with a gang of killers and thugs. Following Nazi orders, they roamed through Riga, the capital, carrying out unspeakable crimes against the Jewish population. Eyewitnesses saw him personally tearing infants from their mothers' arms and murdering them. He and his men burned down a synagogue with 300 people trapped inside, ensuring that no one could escape. The commander adds that Cukurs bears responsibility for exterminating 30,000 Latvian Jews. Thinking about my parents, who both perished in the Holocaust, I accepted without hesitation. Anton Kunzle was considered the ideal candidate for such a mission, largely because of his background. He grew up in Germany during the rise of the Nazis, with German as his mother tongue. He had already been part of the legendary team that captured Adolf Eichmann 4 years earlier. But unlike Eichmann, who orchestrated mass murder from behind a desk, Cukurs had literally shed blood with his own hands. The question arose, should they stage another Eichmann-style operation? Kidnap him? Bring him to trial? Or should they take a different course entirely? This time, the decision was made not to abduct and prosecute, but to execute, and to allow the world's reaction to that fact to reverberate. The plan. Kunzle would befriend Cukurs, lure him out, and kill him. But carrying out an assassination on Brazilian soil posed immense risks. If things went wrong, there might be violent reprisals against Brazil's large Jewish community. If Kunzle was captured, he could very well face execution himself. "We called him the disease from the very beginning," he later recalled, "and we were certain the mission would succeed. The larger aim was to instill fear in Nazis everywhere, making them realize that nowhere in the world could they live safely." Despite the immense danger, the Mossad agent made one stipulation. "I asked to go alone. No squad to protect me. If anyone were seen guarding me, my cover could be blown, and that would mean my death." To operate solo, he required a convincing cover story. "I became Anton Kunzle, an Austrian businessman, supposedly a former Nazi now looking to develop tourism projects in Brazil. I began to grow a mustache. I went to a tailor and commissioned a lightweight black summer suit. At an optician, I even manipulated the results of my eye exam so I could obtain prescription glasses. If my spectacles had turned out to be false, Cukurs might have grown suspicious." Kunzle, with his balding head, mustache, glasses, and slightly stocky build, looked like a thoroughly forgettable Western European. Someone you could pass in the street and never recall. The very picture of an ideal undercover operative. "My bald head and my belly," he quipped, "were the tools that made me appear trustworthy to anyone I met." With a brand new passport, he traveled around Europe, carefully constructing his new persona. He had business cards printed, ordered fine personalized stationery, and took advantage of the era's lack of global communication networks to acquire every official paper he needed. The preparation was straight out of a classic espionage thriller. Armed with his meticulously crafted identity, the Mossad spy advanced to the next stage, the pursuit of the hangman of Riga. I booked a flight to Rio de Janeiro. At first, I wanted to spend time in Rio to observe Brazil and understand the environment before moving on to São Paulo, where my target was located. I toured the city for a few days, reinforcing my cover story. I sought contacts within the local tourism trade, presenting myself as a man looking for investment opportunities. They provided introductions, recommendations, and business cards with names and addresses in São Paulo. I deliberately left a trail of signs at every turn, all reinforcing my invented identity. For Kunzle, the assignment felt sacred. His mother had been murdered in Auschwitz. His father had died in a concentration camp after the Nazi crackdown. I felt I owed my parents a debt, he said. Yet the mission went beyond personal vengeance. Many European nations were preparing to declare that the window for prosecuting Nazi war criminals was officially closing. Israel refused to accept this, insisting that even 2 decades later, justice had to be pursued. Because some crimes can never be forgotten. After a week in Rio, Kunzle moved on to São Paulo, where Herbert Cukurs was living. I went directly to the place where Cukurs worked. I saw him. At the time, Cukurs was renting out boats and also operating a small aviation service. He piloted seaplanes, giving passengers sightseeing tours of São Paulo. By then, he had lived in Brazil for 2 decades. Like many prominent Nazis, Cukurs had escaped there after the war. The Brazilian government, fiercely anti-communist, consistently turned a blind eye to such fugitives. Kunzle knew that if he were caught, Brazilian authorities would not be sympathetic to an Israeli spy. He also understood that this was unprecedented for Mossad. He had been dispatched to Brazil without a support team, working completely on his own. In order to approach Cukurs and win his confidence, and ultimately bring about his death, I knew he appeared very powerful, physically strong, exceptionally fit. I would have to account for this. I chose to return only when I was absolutely certain that I was ready. 48 hours after first spotting his target, Agent Kunzle returns once again to the marina. This time to connect with Herbert Cukurs. I made the decision to hire him for a sightseeing flight over São Paulo. He was an excellent pilot, and in the 1930s he was even celebrated as a national hero in Latvia because he constructed an aircraft and flew it from Riga all the way to Gambia in West Africa, a non-stop flight. Cukurs was truly the Latvian Lindbergh, the most renowned adventurer in Latvia and much of the region at the time. After the flight, the Latvian Nazi extended an invitation to the Israeli spy for a drink. He brought us into his captain's cabin. There, I noticed a gun on display. My body tensed. Because for Cukurs, it would have posed no difficulty at all to murder Anton. Kunzle began portraying himself as a businessman, showing Cukurs his wealth, his influential connections. To Cukurs, Kunzle appeared like a man of obvious means. Cukurs, on the other hand, had earned very little running his modest flying boat pleasure tour business. He lived humbly, enduring serious financial hardship. I told him that I had come to South America to invest capital in the tourism industry. You are connected to it, I said. It would interest me greatly to speak with you. This was the subtle tug on Cukurs' greed. Cukurs then rather quickly confessed to Kunzle that he carried a very dark past. He said, "You know, they say I am a war criminal." Such a remark, that he was a Nazi criminal, might have been his way of testing the man before him. Kunzle, however, did not react at all. He remained indifferent. "Oh, so people say you are a Nazi criminal? Well, all right," he implied. Then Cukurs asked Kunzle, "And what were you doing during the war?" Kunzle knew he had been a captain, but in this case he chose to rank himself lower, claiming he had merely been a lieutenant. He added, "I too was wounded on the Eastern Front." Cukurs replied with interest, "Really?" Kunzle opened his shirt, showing a scar from an operation performed in a Tel Aviv hospital. "I was wounded on the Russian front," he claimed. In reality, a mole or growth had been removed, but he presented it as a wartime injury. This deception reinforced the image that he had served as a loyal officer of the fatherland. Cukurs began to believe, He said, "Why don't you come visit me at my home this week?" I responded, "I cannot say when I shall return." Kunzi understood that to capture his prey, he could not rush like an overeager suitor at a dance, laying his intentions bare too quickly. So he played the long game. I wanted him to simmer in his own oil, he thought. Not so fast. Chi va piano va lontano, he who moves slowly, goes far, and goes safely. Kunzel went back to his hotel and sent a coded message to headquarters in Tel Aviv. Written in secret ink, it read, "The fish has swallowed the bait." But uncertainty still lingered. Roughly a week later, Kunzel returned. This time, Cukurs invited him to dinner with his family. Their home resembled a fortress, surrounded by barbed wire, guard dogs, and floodlights. It was a display of protection, meant to say, "I am secure, well defended." For Kunzel, stepping inside was like walking into the lion's den. No backup team, no protection. If the family suspected he was Mossad, they could kill him, hide his body, and no one would ever know. I met his wife, Assad. Cukurs then proudly displayed his wartime medals and showed me his collection of firearms, handguns of various calibers. To me, it felt like a warning. He seemed to say, "I like you, but make no mistake, I know how to defend myself." Cukurs always wanted to appear the big man. At the same time that Kunzel tried subtly to impress him, Cukurs attempted a far less subtle show of strength, presenting himself as a worthy business partner. He even claimed to own a plantation outside of town. Soon after, he drove me toward the jungle. It was a long journey, and of course a rest stop along the roadside became necessary. Suddenly, Kunzel realized, because he was circumcised, this could raise suspicion. If Cukurs noticed while they relieved themselves, his cover could be compromised. Cleverly, Kunzel had already devised an excuse. If asked, he would say, "Ah yes, during the war I caught gonorrhea in a military brothel on the Russian front. One of the treatments was circumcision." At the plantation, the stakes rose higher. Cukurs suggested a little contest, a shooting match. He produced a sporting rifle. "I thought this might be the end of me," Kunzel recalled. Could Cukurs have lured him here, up to this banana plantation, intending to kill him? They set up a target. Cukurs fired first. His grouping was tight, accurate. Kunzel reflected grimly. Such precision no doubt came from shooting Jews, fleeing through the streets of Riga. Then the rifle was handed to Kunzel. "Do you still know how to shoot?" Cukurs asked. "Yes," Kunzel replied. What Cukurs did not know was that Anton was a true marksman. He had been among the first in Israel to volunteer for the British Army. Kunzel delivered 5 or 6 perfect shots, all within a grouping no larger than 3 centimeters. It was like the classic duel, 2 men, and one proving superior to the other. Cukurs acknowledged it. "All right, you are the better shot." This became a pivotal moment in the hunt, and it crossed Kunzel's mind. I could finish the mission right now, shoot him, bury the body, and it would all be over. But he chose restraint. "I decided not to execute him," he admitted. "I feared discovery. In Brazil, capital punishment still existed. Imagine, an Israeli Mossad agent hanged for executing a Nazi." Cukurs, however, now seemed convinced. He began addressing Kunzel as Herr Anton, a recognition of authority. Psychologically, this gave Cukurs the sense that he could trust the man before him. Over the following weeks, the Israeli spy drew ever closer to his marked target. He escorts him through the dazzling nightlife, the lights, the glamour, and observes that Cukurs is always in firm control. He sips his drink slowly, always watchful, uneasy about everyone nearby, even at one point suspecting one of the waiters might be Jewish, convinced the man was tailing him. He remained extremely cautious of anyone approaching, fully aware that Eichmann had been abducted by the Mossad, and stories were everywhere about Mossad hunting Nazis across the globe. Cukurs was perpetually paranoid, while Anton Kunzler kept working patiently, planting tiny seeds of confidence in his mind. A comment here, a remark there, boasting gently about his financial expertise and his companies. All the while, Kunzler exuded calm assurance, presenting himself as composed, poised, and entirely confident. Cukurs slowly started to believe him. Kunzler would feed him hints, little suggestions about possibly creating a company, maybe involving him, my old friend Herbert, in lucrative ventures. Still, Kunzler could sense the underlying suspicion, so he took care not to promise too much. Meanwhile, Cukurs grew greedier and greedier. The sound of money echoed in his head, convincing him this Mr. Kunzler might be his golden escape from mediocrity into the wealthy world he believed was his rightful place. A world like his glory days during the Second World War. On the very first day of the occupation, I was just 16 when a knock came at the door. Standing there was Herbert Cukurs, declaring, "You are a Jew, you must come out," and nothing else mattered. That was the last time I ever saw my father. It was the beginning of the end. Cukurs stormed in, drove us out of our home, seizing everything we owned. They forced us into a ghetto on the outskirts, fenced with barbed wire, called the Riga ghetto. There, I kissed my mother goodbye for the very last time. By the next morning, she was gone. The Jews were marched from the Riga ghetto by Cukurs and his men into the forest, where tens of thousands were slaughtered. Only 3 survived, and thankfully their testimony remains. He didn't just kill adults. He shot children before their parents, even a baby in front of its mother, according to testimony. Within 4 months I had lost both my mother and father. My entire family was wiped out. They were murdered in mass graves, the sounds of screaming and crying echoing, children howling, women weeping, the gunfire unrelenting. Later, Cukurs took over my apartment, and at night, he would summon me upstairs, forcing me to play piano in my own home while he entertained his girlfriends. Music. I would hear Cukurs laughing, drinking, celebrating, while I sat at the piano. It was unbearable. Though I survived, it is something I will never overcome. Music. The Israeli spy deepens his time with the Latvian Nazi. They explore investments, discuss business plans, mapping ventures. Music. After numerous meetings, Kunzler realizes progress is excellent. The mission is advancing, and the final stage, the execution, is now within reach. 3 weeks after their first encounter, Kunzler tells Cukurs he must return to Europe to manage affairs. "I will send you a telegram," he said. He left, departing for Europe, leaving Cukurs hoping to rise again as a wealthy, influential man. But when Kunzler returns to South America, he will not return alone. Back in Europe, Anton Kunzler sets out to orchestrate the next step against Nazi Herbert Cukurs. He travels to Paris to confer with his fellow agents, debating the best location for the kill. They conclude it must not happen in Brazil. Brazil had a massive Jewish community, and if Jews killed a Nazi openly there, the backlash could fall upon local Jews. Uruguay was more democratic, with only a small Jewish minority, and importantly, no capital punishment. Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay, was chosen as ideal. The plan: lure him to an isolated spot, confront him with charges of murdering 30,000 Jews of Riga, and execute him immediately. Cukurs was a powerful, stocky man, his forearms like those of a heavyweight boxer. They expected a brutal fight. So Mossad assembled a hit team, 4 operatives, trained intensely in hand-to-hand combat. They practiced relentlessly, karate techniques, martial arts maneuvers. The squad was sharpened for the mission. The balding spy then sent the infamous hangman of Riga a letter, urging him to Montevideo, including a check to cover tickets and expenses. Kunzler framed it as a lucrative business opportunity, a promising new venture to explore. Though suspicious and hesitant to leave Brazil, fearing for his safety without his familiar network, the impoverished Nazi could not resist the lure of money. Since he lacked valid papers, he applied for a Brazilian passport, with Kunzler providing supporting letters, presenting him as an employee and associate. Within a week, Cukurs wired a telegram confirming his trip to Montevideo. The trap was in motion. The Mossad agents arrived separately, through different flights and routes, before regrouping in Montevideo to refine the mission. Music. Finding the right property proved difficult. Eventually, they secured a modest suburban house in Montevideo, seemingly perfect, a 1-story dwelling. But next door, Construction workers labored noisily, hammering and shouting. Builders nearby were not ideal, but with time short, they decided it had to suffice. Now all that remained was the target. To guarantee Cukurs didn't back out, Kunzler met him in São Paulo and proposed traveling together to Montevideo. As Kunzler disembarked at São Paulo, Cukurs stood waiting. He carried a Super 8 camera, filming. As Kunzler stepped off the plane, Cukurs raised the camera and took his picture. Kunzler tried desperately to shield his face. The spy was horrified. A photograph was the last thing any operative wanted. He snapped at Cukurs. "Herbert, do you have your documents ready for Uruguay?" Cukurs admitted he hadn't obtained them yet. Kunzler, angry, retorted sharply, "If you wish to do business with me, never behave like this again. Never send a telegram claiming readiness when you are not prepared." He resolved to act as the superior, the boss, a bold bluff that worked flawlessly. "I expect your telegram in Montevideo at my hotel. Meanwhile, finalize your papers." Eventually, Cukurs secured his passport, enabling him to fly on to Montevideo to meet his so-called business partner, Anton Kunzler. Before departing, Cukurs did something peculiar. He handed his wife the Super 8 film of Kunzler at the airport. Was it merely a keepsake of a short, balding man with a mustache? No. Cukurs' paranoia endured. He told his wife, "If anything happens to me, this man is responsible." 5 months after the Mossad operation began, the Latvian Nazi confirmed his flight to Montevideo. He reunited with the Israeli assassin at the hotel. They checked into a lavish, expensive hotel, part of the strategy to reassure him, to maintain the illusion that everything was progressing smoothly. From the beginning, Cukurs felt conflicted about Kunzler. On one hand, it seemed a fortunate chance. An Austrian ex-Wehrmacht officer turned businessman, offering dazzling promises of future wealth. On the other, Cukurs was no fool, sharp, perceptive, always aware that one day he would have to pay for his monstrous crimes. He knew deep inside that he was far from innocent. He carried a heavy air of suspicion around him. Yet Cukurs, still consumed by his endless hunger for money, despite harboring doubts about Kunzler, decides to go along, because desperation for cash outweighs his mistrust. So Kunzler says to Cukurs, "Listen, I really need your guidance. Help me track down a new office space, maybe a satellite branch." He asks him, "Can you join me? Come along and check out a few buildings we might consider using as offices." Together, the two men spend hours driving across the city in a small VW Beetle, looking at one location after another. The purpose is simple. Kunzler wants Cukurs to feel at ease, to lower his guard, to make him believe this is ordinary business. After touring Montevideo for a while, Anton Kunzler finally says to Cukurs, "There's one more place I want you to see. It will be the last ride, the trip leading to the villa where the plan to kill him will unfold." Kunzler now needs to signal the rest of the team that everything is moving according to the arranged script. He makes sure the car does not have much petrol left, then halts deliberately at a particular gas station. Across the road, another member waits, watching carefully. With a subtle gesture, Kunzler communicates, "The plan is intact." The lookout then alerts the hidden hit squad. The time has come to gather at the house. Inside, the agents prepare. They strip down, knowing a fierce struggle is inevitable. They expect Cukurs will not submit quietly, that violence and resistance are guaranteed. They brace themselves for what could turn very bloody. Leading the way, Kunzler walks first, playing the role of authority. He knows if he merely tells Cukurs, "Go inside," suspicion will arise. But if he enters himself, Cukurs will naturally follow. As he steps forward, Kunzler's mind races. He cannot hear footsteps behind him. He wonders, is Cukurs hesitating? Is he sensing danger? Is this the moment he attacks me from behind? A blow to the skull, ending me before the plan even begins? But then, at last, the sound comes. The footsteps of Cukurs approaching, closing in. Every nerve in Kunzler tenses, convinced the strike may come at any second. He opens the door and steps inside. And instantly, agents leap from hiding. Cukurs bursts forward through the doorway, and a ferocious, chaotic fight erupts. One agent pounces, throwing him to the floor. But Cukurs fights with the fury of a lion. Even young, well-trained Mossad operatives find themselves struggling to restrain him. Amid the chaos, Cukurs reaches for his own gun. A hammer is swung. The blow crumples him, but still he clings to life. He shouts out desperately, "That's me, let me speak." But the answer comes cold, 2 bullets to the head. And with that, Herbert Cukurs is dead. Agents, bloodied and half-clothed, stand over the fallen man. The plan had been to disable him, to read aloud the judgment prepared against him. But in the violence of the struggle, that ritual is abandoned. Instead, a large trunk, made ready beforehand, is used. They place his lifeless body inside, attaching a note that declares, given the enormity of the crimes committed by Herbert Cukurs, his responsibility in the massacre of 30,000 men, women, and children, and the terrible cruelty with which he carried them out, he has been sentenced to death. This execution took place on 23 February 1965, carried out by those who will never forget. The operatives dress, each departing in separate directions exactly as planned. Soon, they are all back on the road to Paris. The mission is finished. Once in Paris, the Mossad team faces its next challenge, to ensure the world learns that Herbert Cukurs has been executed. They contact news agencies in Uruguay, informing them a notorious murderer's body will be discovered in a Montevideo house. A call is even placed to a Paraguayan newspaper, but a junior editor receives it and ignores the message. Days pass, 1, 2, 3, and nothing is reported. Inside Mossad, frustration grows. Nobody seems to believe the execution truly happened. Meanwhile, Cukurs' family begins to worry. Days of silence weigh heavily on them. His son later recalls on television, "At first everything seemed normal, but after a few days, our concern deepened." So, another call is placed, this time to a Uruguayan agency. With fuller details shared, an editor finally takes the claim seriously and alerts police. 12 days after the killing, Montevideo police discover the decomposed corpse inside a trunk in a house on Cartagena Street. When the trunk is opened, the sight is horrifying. The bloated body of Cukurs, crawling with decay. A fingerprint confirms the identity against his passport. News spreads rapidly, just as intended. Listeners on radios across the world hear the report. A body found in Uruguay belonging to Herbert Cukurs. For many, dread sets in immediately. What follows is a wave of anti-Semitism. Synagogues are torched in Uruguay and Sao Paulo, and scattered violence erupts. Yet no massive organized retaliation occurs. Israel's message, it seems, has been delivered unmistakably. Just 4 days after the discovery, the German government responds, extending the statute of limitations for prosecuting Nazi war criminals. But for police in Montevideo, a homicide remains. The family circulates photographs of Anton Kunzler to global media. The only image, one taken at an airport. But by then it is too late. Interpol is called in to identify him, yet Kunzler has already vanished back into the anonymity of Israel, resuming life as another Mossad operative. The case grows cold. 2 decades later, Mossad finally admits responsibility for the assassination of Herbert Cukurs. Many celebrate the act. It was horrible, yes, but deserved, some say. We must never forget. But Cukurs' family continues to deny his guilt. Witnesses testify, yet the family insists. 60 years have passed without a single document proving crimes. If such proof does not exist, declare his innocence. Our family has lived in torment under these accusations. To this day, the operative responsible, Anton Kunzler, has never revealed his real name. He returned quietly to Israel, shaving off his mustache, discarding his glasses, and continuing to serve Mossad for years. The mission was flawless in execution, if morally complex. They found their target, and they eliminated him swiftly. In many ways, it was the perfect operation. Calculated, efficient, and unforgettable. And for those who carried it out, satisfaction remained. Life in Mossad was never, ever dull.